This week we begin talking about organizations, and in particular this week we're going to talk about dynamics and structure. So as you know, I love definitions. I think it helps us get all on the same page. So a definition of an organization is a formally structured arrangement of people, tools, and resources brought together to achieve predetermined objectives through institutional strategies. And although this definition is from the Social Work Dictionary, you would find very similar definitions in the business world. So when we talk about organizations, we typically divide them into two different categories. It's a little more complicated than that, but typically they are categorized in one of two categories: non-human service organizations and human service organizations. So take a minute and think about what an agency or an organization that you think would fit into one or the other of these categories. Okay, so a non-human service organization is one that provides non-human services. So it might provide durable goods such as shoes, coats, computers, knickknacks, all those sorts of pieces, so that the organization is intended to provide non-human services. It might also be an organization that provided services to, let's say, animals. So a greyhound rescue organization, a pet shelter, anything along those lines. And of course, the human service organization provides services to humans. So an example of this is probably more where we're going to be talking about, and that could be a hospital, Department of Family Services, a mental health agency, domestic violence agency, so on and so forth. We hope that an organization is organized. And so when we talk about the organizational structure, we talk about the system of task reporting and authority relationships within which the work of the organization is done. So how do we organize everyone so that what our goal is able to be completed, or work towards reaching that goal? And typically when we talk about organizational structure, we talk about organization charts, which I have below. And this is the formal structure of how management thinks the organization should be run. Okay? Typically, people at the top are in charge, and then individuals below are spelled out by who they supervise. So in this particular organizational chart, you can see that the training personnel officer, I think that's what the PO means, doesn't have anyone who reports to them directly. Either does the material personnel officer. But they are in line and they have authority within the organization at the same level as the division LPO. But the individuals, such as the work center supervisors, do not report to the training or the material personnel officer. They only report to the division LPO, which I'm not sure what that stands for, who then reports to the division officer. And so the division individual is responsible for also, I guess, the senior section leader. And then, of course, it goes down from there. Okay, so the section leader also has people underneath them. They report to someone. This is the formal chain of command. Now, we all know that there are informal chains of command in organizations, which, although we have section leader 1, 2, 3, 4 down here, and they're all supposed to report to the senior section leader, they might maybe get along better with section 1 leader, and that person may have actually been in the position longer than the senior section leader. And so they might actually report to that individual informally and ask that individual what to do instead of going to the senior section leader. And so that's very common in organizations where those informal leadership and structures and lines of communication exist and can sometimes be quite problematic. So what I talked about already, a little more formal definition, that the lines of authority concerns the specific administrative and supervisory responsibilities of supervisors involving their supervisees. So if we're talking about the chart on the previous slide, that although let's just go back because I'm going to get their names wrong. The section leader 4 might actually be going to section leader 1, and then that person gives them feedback on what they should do. Really, he or she has no authority to make decisions, and only the senior section leader has that authority. And so also what happens sometimes, and it's not uncommon, is the section leader 3 maybe knows the division LPO and may jump over the senior section leader and go directly to them, and so crosses those authority lines where they should have talked to the senior section leader first. And again, that those lines of authority can really be problematic when they are stepped over and can cause some significant issues within an organization. All right. So the channels of communication, Mish describes communication as a process by which information is exchanged between two individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, or behaviors. And if you think about it within an agency, the communication may be a memo, can be an email, a message left on your desk. It can be the way someone sees someone walking down the hall and turns around and walks the other way. Avoidance of eye contact, looking at each other during a meeting and smirking. All those, of course, are channels of communication. And so, again, when we're talking about this within an organizational context, we can think about the formal lines of authority that imply that the communication channels are supposed to flow along those lines. But like I've already stated, it's very common that they don't. Likewise, from top down, supervisors are supposed to communicate directly with their supervisees and the managers who supervise them, but again, this isn't always the case either. Sometimes they keep the information to themselves. Sometimes they jump over the supervisor and go right straight to the line worker, and again, this can be very problematic. A lot of times this has to do with power, which is defined by Griffin and Moorhead as the potential ability to move people on a chosen course to produce an effect or achieve some goal. So in an organization, someone can have many different types of power, and we're going to talk about that a little later on in this organizational section. But power within an organization may or may not have anything to do with the authority that the individual has. There's all sorts of different types of power, and we talked about some of them when we talked about groups and about legitimate power, coercive power, so on and so forth, that people can have and influence one another. let's see, is there something else I wanted to share with you there? No, I don't think so. Okay, so I like this, and this is from Kirst Ashman text, and it has to do with the formal and informal structures in an agency. So, if you've ever spent any time in an agency, this should look very familiar to you. And on the left, we have the supervisor for psychology, who is Ellen, and on the right, we have the supervisor for social work, who is Roseanne. And Roseanne has two social workers who she supervises, and Ellen has two psychologists that she supervises. But when we actually look at the system, what we have is a whole mismatch of who is really talking to who and how that is working out. In a perfect, beautiful world, and in the employee handbook, it says that Karen and Susan are to communicate with Roseanne if they have an issue, or if they need feedback, if they have a request, any of those sorts of issues. But what it shows is the real-life informal channels of communication is that Roseanne and Karen actually have a conflicted or broken communication stream, and so there really is no communication going there. So what has happened is that Ellen and Karen maybe are friends because they're actually on the same level in this chart, so they're talking to each other as equals. And then Karen, the social worker, is somehow has a power differential over Shirley, even though they technically should be at the same level. Something has happened there that she has some sort of power over Shirley, and so she's able to monopolize, to impact that communication piece. You'll see that Ellen does not have a good relationship and has broken communication with Shirley, which is probably why Karen, who for whatever reason has a direct connection to Ellen, probably has that power over Shirley. And then Laverne is sort of out there, but she's not. There's not a supervisory relationship there. There's not that level of difference between them. And then you'll see that Susan is at the same level, that there is maybe a friendship there or some sort of relationship that Roseanne and Susan are more like equals and have that very tight relationship, a convoluted communication piece. All right. So there are many, many barriers to effective communication. And there are typically at least 4 barriers, and they're in the middle there. The noise, the personality factors, individual errors and perceptions, and then the lying and distortion. So on the left you have the sender, who has intent, but it is being impacted by those 4 different barriers, and then they are impacting how the receiver receives that information. Okay. So the first one is noise. All right. It can interfere with the intended message. That it might just be that there is too much stimuli going on, so that individuals find it difficult to organize, interpret, and even retain what has been said. So Sally might tell Jane something, but Jane has so much noise going on that she's not able to retain that information, so she doesn't remember that Sally told her the information. let's see. Okay. Then we have personality factors. Alright, that's always one of the most interesting parts of working within an organization. So those can fall into one of 5 categories, although I'm sure that there could be other ones that you could identify. One of them is emotional stability. Okay, so does the person feel calm, secure, and free from persistent negative feelings? Can they be calm, hear what you say, or is it an individual that flies off the handle, who doesn't handle information, constructive feedback, or criticism very effectively, and so that interferes with the communication. Agreeableness is another one, and that is the person's ability to get along with others. If someone is agreeable, people are more likely to interact with that person and seek that person out. If someone is short-tempered, if they're uncooperative, if they're irritable, if they snap at people, individuals are going to be less likely to engage in them, and they're also more likely to feel uncomfortable in their interactions with that person, so they might be more defensive and less likely to communicate their feelings and ideas. And then we have extraversion and introversion. Extroverts tend to really like to be around other people. They like to interact with others, and so they can be perceived as fun to be with. Introverts tend to like to have their quiet space, and so they might spend more time in their office, more time working on records, more time focused in on a task, might need to keep their doors shut in order to get the work done, and others may perceive them as isolating and not open to working with the other individuals within the organization. Conscientiousness is another personality factor. This involves self-discipline, acting responsibly, and directing our behavior. This individual who is conscientious places importance on achieving goals and getting things done. So these are the people that you might just assume that they're going to get information or get tasks done. Don't need to have a lot of input in them. You can depend on them. If they say that they're going to get something done, they're going to get something done. A person who is not conscientious is more difficult to work with, more difficult to communicate with. It is hard to trust unreliable individuals, people who are not conscientious. So if you say to, my picture went black, say to, Sally says to Jane, I need this done by Friday, and Jane says, yeah, I'll do it, and Sally knows that Jane is not conscientious. She already has an idea of how this is going to come about, even though she may or may not be correct. And so how she relays that information may be in a much more gruff, assertive way than she would with someone who she knows is going to get it done. So she might say to Joe, who is very conscientious and gets things done all the time, hey Joe, could you make sure this gets done by Friday, and then not worry about it again, where Sally and Jane might have to have the conversation over and over again. Sally gets irritated with Jane, so on and so forth. And then there's openness, describes imagination and creativity. So if someone is open to different ways of doing tasks, projects, then that person is going to approach that other individual much more differently. If they're closed, that they don't like to do change or what have you, they might be less willing to share information with that person, and they might be hesitant or even again approach it in a very different and maybe not as positive way because they know that they're going to meet resistance. Alright, so those are some of the personality factors that go into creating barriers for effective interpersonal communication. And then we have individual errors in perception. So this it feeds into some of these other pieces, the noise and the personality factors. So if I think that I have an accuracy of judgment about how things are going to happen, then I am going to view the world in a different way than if I think that I don't know what's going to happen. So if I also think that because we have the beautiful organizational chart that as a supervisor, my supervisees are going to come directly to me and report information to me, then that's also going to be, and that's not the case, and there's a circular way of dealing with issues, then that's going to impact my perception, and it's going to impact the communication. A second error of judgment is called a contrast error, and this involves placing too much emphasis on how a job candidate compares with other candidates in the pool. Okay? So if I think that someone is an average candidate, but I put them in, let's say the person is an average candidate, okay? And I put them in a pool of individuals who are just not good applicants. They don't have the skills and knowledge that are needed for the position. The average candidate is going to look stellar, and I'm going to think, wow, this person is amazing because of the contrast error. The third individual error in perception is a first impression error. This is an example of this would be if you interview someone or you're talking to someone and your first contact with them, they're crabby. Let's say that they're just really short-tempered that day. Or it might even be that they're dressed head to toe in orange and you really hate the color orange. Then you're going to carry that impression with you. And it may have been that the crabby person just had a really awful morning. Maybe they were in a car crash on the way to work, their car was totaled, they had been planning a trip, but now the money has to go to pay for the car trip, or for the car repairs, or the person who was wearing orange just it has nothing to do with their personality or anything, but that's what you carry with them. And so you carry with you an intense dislike for that person or a wariness of that person. And it might be the opposite too. So maybe your first impression is with someone and you really think highly of the person. You think, wow, this person really gets it. I really understand them. And then you think this person is good, and so you promote this person. You're like, yeah, we need to work with this person, so on and so forth. But when you get to know the person better, you find out that the person doesn't share your same value system, that the person doesn't have knowledge in other areas that are necessary to perform their role, so on and so forth. So that is that first impression error. The last one is lying and distortion. And this one has to do with information that is used to basically get people's needs met. All right? So someone, let's just define lying first. Lying is the use of communication to deceive information receivers into believing something that is not true. Right? And then distortion represents a wide range of messages that a sender may use between the extremes of lying and complete honesty. So if I say this and that, but I don't necessarily connect them, but I know that you're going to think that they're connected, that would be distortion. I wish I could think of a good example. But I put information together, and if you put them together, I may do that on purpose to get you to connect the two, but I could say, well, I didn't say that, but I have presented it in such a way that it would be easy to interpret that I was connecting the two. Sometimes distortion provides a means of impression management, which is an attempt by an individual to manipulate or control the impressions that others inform about them. So this might be, go back up to that errors in perception, that I want you to have a really good first impression of me. So I might, let's say, I know we're going to have a meeting about child welfare. So I go out and I look up a whole bunch of information about child welfare. And I come to the meeting and I'm able to rattle off and really sound smart about child welfare. But in reality, I have no knowledge, or very extremely limited knowledge of child welfare. But I knew that I needed to sound good, so I went out on the internet and I spent maybe an hour and a half reading everything I could and just threw in some key phrases and what have you, so that it sounded like I really knew what I was talking about. I'm and I think it's important to note that lying is clearly unethical. But levels of distortion are a little bit more complex. It's sort of that gray area. I gave you examples that were pretty clear-cut that I believe went to the dishonesty side of the coin. But distortion can be necessary when there is potential negative repercussions for an agency. So someone might distort what is actually going on in an agency by not lying and saying things are really awful, and we're going to be closed down by, let's say, JACO. They might not say that because you have an ethical responsibility to your agency, but you might say instead, we're facing some challenges and we're working really hard to meet those challenges. It's a distortion. It's not quite, it's not lying. It's not saying that everything is beautiful and we have rose-tinted glasses, but it also is not giving the full impact of what is happening at the agency. I hope that I made that clear. All right. So, there you go. There are many different barriers to effective interpersonal communication, and I bet you could all come up with examples of each of these different categories.